put all of that nonsense into context, we are SubPar Endurance Racing, brought to you by Minami. We are a group of friends who enjoy doing car activities together on the cheap, and we've decided to run this, our 1984 Toyota Corona, named Sunny, at a 25-hour endurance race at the Bend Motorsport Park in South Australia. Over the course of the next few months, Sunny is going to be converted from a very, very slow road car to a very, very slow race car. We'll get back to the car in a second. Now, let's meet the team.
This is our 1984 Toyota Corona Wagon, or as it's known on the streets, the ST141. It comes standard with the 2SC engine, which is a naturally aspirated, carbureted 4-cylinder single overhead cam engine. Wikipedia tells me it makes all of 73 kilowatts. For now, this is the engine we are sticking with. We are not going to try and make it any more powerful. Our goal for the first event is just to finish the first event. Sunny came with the optional 5-speed. It has a McPherson strut front suspension setup, and in the rear, a live axle with coil springs. These Coronas are basically mechanically identical to Celica's of the period.
The goal for stage 1 of the build is to get the car ready to race without making any major performance advancements. This meant adding safety equipment such as a cage, a seat, a harness, better suspension, bigger tyres, tacho, which I think looks pretty smart, and a bunch of other stuff.
Now that you know who we are and what we're doing, let's get into the build. The first and biggest item on the list was getting a roll cage installed. This dictated where we had to put the seat and a bunch of other things around the car. But before the roll cage could go in, we had to clear out as much of the interior as possible. This is where we implemented our first method of using a heat gun and a wooden spatula to clear out the sour denting in the car. We chose this method first to protect the car, but Cam got pretty bored with that, so he just started belting it with a hammer. The last big ticket item we had before we could send the car off to the fabricator was removing the windscreen. This is so the fabricator had access to the front of the cage.
Removing any windscreen can be tricky. An extreme excess of glue had been used to hold this one in, and the combination of heat and pressure did eventually end in disaster. I think the heat's pretty responsible for that.
Well, it's going to be easy to get this out now.
No.
God damn it.
Fuck.
Once the damage had been done, we decided to use brute force, or as we call him, Gavin, to get the windscreen the rest of the way out.
It's so hard. On American TV shows when they do this, the windscreen just folds out.
When brute force didn't work, we tried sawing at it with a piece of steel cable. This also didn't really work. We then just tried attacking the windscreen with a screwdriver and fighting with each other.
Gav too.
Get your hand away. You're about to go...
This is good bit.
Put your wire under there.
Underwear, Gav!
Next to the screwdriver where the gap is.
There's no gap!
This is good B-roll, guys.
No gap! Despite the conflict, this actually was the method that got the windscreen out.
That was like felling a tree vibes.
While between us we do have some fabricating experience, we didn't think the glory of building our own cage was worth the time and effort to attend 3 of our friends' funerals. Once the cage was all done, we moved on to getting the seat fitted. This did end up being a little bit tricky because the driver's side intrusion bar was a little bit inboard than we would have wanted. See that the right-hand shoulder of the seat is pressed right up to the side intrusion bar. This meant that the center line of the seat is nowhere near the center line of the steering wheel. This is because the main hoop doesn't closely follow the B-pillar.
This meant that there was no way to make it work with the 2 sets of generic seat brackets that we had. To solve this, we cut up the Sparco seat brackets. This meant we could put each corner of the seat wherever we wanted at different heights, allowing us to mount the seat perfectly flat despite it being twisted horizontally in the car.
To get the front of the seat to sit low enough, we had to cut away some of this bracing on the floor of the car. We figured this would be okay as we're already increasing the stiffness by putting a roll cage in a car that never had a roll cage. Because of the way the seat was twisted, the left rear mount interfered pretty badly with the transmission tunnel. We didn't have a lot of space to bash it around and we wouldn't have been left with a flat surface anyway, so I set my welder to seat bracket mode and glued it on here. Because the best thing about having a race car is feeling like you're Richard Trickle, we wanted the interior to feel like it was a race car. Kit went in with the wire brush and cleaned all of the rest of the sound deadening out. He then painted the interior all by himself. We assume because he thought we would do a pretty bad job.
Oh, look what we've done. We painted the interior.
Anyway,
We initially decided just to go with lowering springs and performance shocks on all four corners. After we'd installed these parts, to our dismay, the car was nowhere near stiff or slammed enough for our liking, so we decided to spend $50,000 on coilovers for this $50 Toyota Corona. The Corona uses a one-piece strut and knuckle assembly, so in order to make our coilovers work, you have to cut off the stock strut and weld on the new coilovers as a sleeve over the top. Weirdly, nobody makes race-spec coilovers for a Toyota Corona. What we ended up using were coilovers made for an RA40 Celica. We knew the front setup was identical, however, we're a bit unsure about the rear, so we just decided to burn that bridge when we came to it. To our chagrin, the bridge was already burned when we got there. Luckily, we still had the lowering springs for the rear, and we were able to make that work with the shocks that came with the Celica kit, and it actually ended up being low and stiff enough for our liking.
The original bushes in the Corona were all cactus, but we wanted them to be polyurethane, so we replaced them all. Here you can see Kit changing all the rear bushings. Actually, he did the front bushings too. I just didn't want to give him credit.
speaking of taking credit away from Kit,
I swear to God, I'm gonna find the video that says their right-hand thread
on Coronas specifically,
on all Borg Warners.
the reason Kit's making excuses is because as he was disassembling the diff, he loosely remembered a video telling him they were right-hand thread, which is actually normal thread. He thought that meant left-hand thread, so he tried to undo them by tightening them until they were smooth. The fact that this was one of our only major hiccups during the build means we actually got pretty lucky. The reason we were taking the diff apart was to weld it. Even though the car makes little to no power, if it was a wet race or if the rear started to slide, or if we got a bit bogged during one of our tours of the gravel trap, we want to be able to drive both rear wheels. Luckily the threads in the diff center weren't damaged, but a lot of the bolts had been stretched by Kit's innovative technique. Once we'd replaced them, Gav set the welder to diff and did this spell that means you get maximum traction at all times.
One of the major problems we faced during the build was that no one really makes any performance parts for this car. So this meant replacing basically anything we could with OEM quality stuff. Brake pads, brake discs, wheel bearings, uni joints, and just crossed our fingers. Back on safety equipment, fitting the racing harnesses was a lot of trial and error. Setting the harnesses to different lengths, chucking the seat in, testing it, seat out, seat in, that sort of jazz.
Because we're not absolute degenerates, and because we didn't want people to see the absolute mess that we'd made, we decided to put the dash back in. This involved offering the dash up to the car, marking where we needed to cut the holes for the cage, and then cutting them. Luckily, the cage almost exactly lined up with these vents, so we could just cut a line straight back, and it didn't look like we hacked up the dash too badly. For reliability, we replaced the clutch with this nifty pink one. This was pretty straightforward, however, it was a bit of a pain because we didn't have a lot of room.
One of the surprisingly challenging jobs was to fit a tachometer. The car didn't come with one originally, and none of us had ever fitted an aftermarket tachometer before. We decided to really splash out and get this one that was on special at Super Cheap Auto. After 15 hours, we'd found the correct signal wire coming from the distributor. Then it was just a case of calling our out-of-state electrical engineer Nick to design a circuit to clean up the signal. We ended up with this slightly goofy placement as we ran out of time to fit it neatly where the clock is. Then came the mad scramble to fit all the little finishing touches like a fire extinguisher, a mirror, a window net to make us legal for the race. Then finally, just 3 days before we had to leave for South Australia, we saw the car sitting on the ground for the first time.
It actually looks so fucking good.
Due to the enormous amount of stress and the ridiculous time frame, we neglected to film almost anything between this moment and arriving in South Australia.
We arrived at the bend the day before the event. Only 5 minutes left at scrutineering. Only half the stickers were on the car, but it ran. It moved under its own steam. None of us had driven the car at this point, so we were extremely nervous.
This is a bad idea and it's on camera now. We're gonna look like idiots.
Tune in next time to see how a professional racing outfit handles a 25-hour endurance race.
Put it on our head like Ratatouille.
Nick, help me.
Ah, mother.
Now place the finger over the inlet.
This is so annoying. Just flat out the entire time.
Oh, look what we've done. stars.